the Sorvan Alliance had been right about everything. Human ships were retreating on all three fronts. The colony worlds were burning. High Commander Vress was already composing the after-action report in her head. Targets neutralized. Resistance minimal. Operation concluded within projected parameters, when her sensor chief made a sound that she had never heard from him before. Not an alert, not a report, just a sound. The sound a person makes when the instrument in front of them returns something the person's brain refuses to immediately accept. She crossed to his station in 4 steps. She looked at the reading. She looked at it again. Something was there that had not been there before, not approaching from outside the system, not decloaking at the perimeter. There, 400 meters off the port bow of her flagship, in the space between her first and second fleet formation that her sensors had been sweeping continuously for 6 hours. There, as though it had always been there, and had simply decided to stop being invisible. The mass reading was wrong. She read it 3 times and it was wrong 3 times. The scale on her sensor display was calibrated for vessels up to 1.8 kilometers. The number on her screen exceeded that calibration by a factor she did not immediately want to calculate. She said, "Verify." Her sensor chief ran the verification. He ran it twice. He turned to her. He said, "Verified, High Commander." She looked at the number. She thought about 8 years of studying human military capacity. Every report filed, every assessment accurate, every number in their cataloged inventory confirmed by independent verification. She thought, I read the summaries. The ship opened a channel before she could decide what to do next. A voice, male, old enough to have history behind it, calm in the specific way of someone who has been waiting for a very long time for a very specific moment, and is finding, now that the moment has arrived, that it is quieter than he expected. He said, "High Commander Vress, my name is Admiral Thomas Bickel. I apologize for the wait. We have been busy." On the bridge of the CDS Unspoken Promise, Lieutenant Nadia Akoy was talking. This was not unusual. Nadia talked when she was nervous, full sentences, sometimes in directions that surprised her as she was saying them. Admiral Bickel had learned in the 3 months since she joined his crew that this was not a problem. Nervous people notice things that calm people missed. Nadia noticed everything. She said, "Sir, the mass reading on our ship is coming back on their sensors as I don't know what that number means. Sir, that is genuinely not a number I have seen on a sensor display before. Is that normal? For us specifically, I mean, not generally, because generally that number." Thomas said, "It is correct." She said, "How big are we?" He said, "Big enough." She said, "Sir, respectfully, that is not an answer. That is the shape of an answer without the content." He almost smiled. The almost smile of someone who had not smiled in a long time and was finding the mechanism still worked. He said, 4.2 kilometers. The sound Nadia made was not a word. It was the sound her brain produced when it encountered a number that exceeded its current framework and needed a moment to rebuild the framework. Then she said, "How?" He said, very carefully, "Over 22 years, in a location nobody thought to examine." She looked at her console. She looked at the ship schematics she had memorized in training, every coalition vessel class, every known configuration. Nothing in her training covered 4.2 kilometers. Nothing in anyone's training covered 4.2 kilometers. She said, "We built this." He said, "Yes." She said, "For 22 years." He said, "Yes." She said, "And nobody." He said, "The resources were distributed across 11 separate budget lines, individually unremarkable, collectively significant." He looked at the display showing 3 colony worlds, 2 of them trailing smoke against the curve of their atmospheres. It was completely within the technical boundaries of my authorization. She said, "Was it within the?" He said the spirit of my authorization was to protect the coalition. He watched the smoke. Yes, I believe it was. His hand went to his breast pocket, not reaching inside, just resting against it, the way a hand rested against something it had been resting against for a very long time. Nadia noticed. She was watching everything she always was. On the Sorvin flagship, analyst Pran was running calculations that he had been running in various forms for 3 years. He had filed 4 reports about anomalies in coalition construction data, small inconsistencies, resources entering the coalition's industrial infrastructure that did not emerge as any cataloged ship class or documented project. The anomalies were individually unimportant. Collectively, they implied a resource expenditure on a scale that his reports had not been able to make credible, because credible required precedent and there was no precedent. He had written what he could support, he had kept the rest. Now he was looking at the rest. He brought his assessment to Vress. She was at the communications station, watching the channel that Thomas had opened, her hands behind her back and her face professionally still. He said, "High Commander, preliminary comparison of the unspoken promises, observed specifications against our tactical database." She said, "Report." He said, "We do not have an engagement model for this vessel class. Our weapons are calibrated for the largest known coalition ship, which is approximately 1/7 of this vessel's mass. Our doctrine for an engagement with something this size," he paused, "does not exist, because nothing this size has existed." She said, "Then we build the doctrine now." He said, "Yes, High Commander, I need time." She said, "How much?" He said, "I do not know." She looked at him. He had been transferred to her flagship 3 weeks ago, after his 4th report had been reviewed and set aside. She had read the summary. She remembered finding the conclusion, significant project of unknown nature, plausible in a minor way and implausible in any major way, because the scale he implied was too large to be credible. She said, "Your 4th report." He said, "Yes, High Commander." She said, "The conclusion, what you actually believed, not what you wrote." He looked at her. He said, "I believed they were building a ship. I could not make the scale credible in a report because the precedent didn't exist, so I wrote what I could support." He paused. "I did not believe it was this ship." She said, "But you believed it was a ship." He said, "Yes." She looked at the display. 4.2 kilometers, 112 weapon systems, 47 fighters in the bays, 31 gunships, a hull 3 times the thickness of anything in her cataloged inventory. She said, "We read the summaries." He said nothing. There was nothing useful to say. Vress called Thomas. The channel opened and she looked at him and he looked at her, and for a moment neither of them said anything, which was the honest version of both of them understanding exactly what the other person had. She said, "Admiral Bikel, I want to understand what I am looking at." He said, "You are looking at 22 years of work." She said, "One ship." He said, "One ship that changes the conversation." She said, "We have 3 fleets in this system." He said, "Yes. They stopped firing 14 minutes ago. The colonies needed the 14 minutes." She said, "I halted the operation to assess." He said, "I know, it was the correct call. You are a careful commander." She absorbed the observation without responding to it. Then, "Why did you come alone?" He said, "Because one ship is enough for the conversation I want to have. A fleet gives you 2 options, fight or run. One ship gives you a third." She said, "What third option?" He said, "Listen." She was quiet for a moment. Behind her, Pran was working through calculations at his station, his movements small and precise. The bridge of the Sorvin flagship smelled of recycled air and the particular metallic quality of equipment running at high output, weapon systems still warm from 14 minutes ago. She said, "What do you want?" He said, "The same thing I wanted 22 years ago when a committee told me no." He looked at the colony worlds on his display. I want the Sorvan Alliance to understand that the calculation about humanity needs updating. Not feared, updated. There is a significant difference. She said, fear produces irrational decisions. He said, and accurate assessments produce accurate ones. The assessment that led to today's operation was based on the information available. The information has changed. She said, the information was current as of 6 months ago. He said, the information was current as of our cataloged inventory as of 6 months ago. There was other information available. Prawn had it. He filed 4 reports. She was very still. He said, High Commander, I am not here to assign blame. I am here because 1,400 people are dead on 3 colony worlds, and I would like to prevent the conversation that produces that number from happening again. She said 1,400. He said, numbers still coming in. She looked at something he couldn't see, a display, a number, something off-screen that changed the quality of her stillness. Nadia had stopped talking. This was unusual enough that Thomas noticed it. She was at her station, fingers resting on the console without moving, her eyes on the secondary sensor display, where she had been running passive analysis on the Sorvan fleet communications since the engagement began. He said, Nadia. She blinked. She said, sorry, sir, I have something. He said, go ahead. I have been reading the signal patterns on their fleet comm network. Not content, just volume and frequency, response time between ships. She turned in her chair. Their doctrine is fracturing, 3 different response postures forming across the 3 fleets. They're not coordinated. The command signal is going out and hitting different commanders and producing different calculations, and those different calculations are not talking to each other. She paused. The second fleet, 12 ships. Their transmission volume has been increasing for the last 8 minutes. They are building consensus to act without authorization from Vress. Thomas said, how long? She said, 18 minutes, maybe less. Whichever commander is most uncomfortable with ambiguity goes first. She touched the small scar on her left hand, a childhood thing, a kitchen accident. She did it when she was trying to be calm. It will be aggressive. The pattern says aggressive. Thomas said, thank you. She said, sir, I want to be clear. I am reading signal behavior, not intentions, and there is. He said, it is enough. You did exactly right. He opened the channel to Vress. He said, High Commander, your second fleet is building toward an independent action. 18 minutes, probably less. I am telling you so you can respond before someone makes the decision for you. The silence on the channel was 3 seconds long. 3 seconds from a commander with 30 years of experience was not nothing. She said, you are reading our communications. He said, signal patterns only, volume and frequency, enough to know that somebody is about to get uncomfortable. He paused. I would prefer this conversation to continue. She said, why are you telling me? He said, because one of your commanders firing on this ship ends the conversation. I do not want the conversation to end. Another pause. Then she closed the channel. He heard before it closed a single word in her command voice directed at someone off-screen. The translation matrix caught it. Stand down. He watched the second fleet's signal volume drop. Nadia let out a breath she had been holding. She said, that worked. He said, she is a careful commander. Nadia said, you keep saying that. He said, it keeps being true. The real conversation started 20 minutes later. Not the formal one. The one underneath the formal one, where 2 people stopped performing their positions and started speaking as themselves. Thomas recognized the shift when it happened. He had been in enough rooms where it happened and not happened to know the difference. Vress said, Admiral Bikel, I need to tell you something. He said, go ahead. She said, the 3-world operation, the targeting parameters. Civilian infrastructure was included in the secondary target list. I approved those parameters 6 weeks ago." She paused. The pause had weight in it. The briefing to fleet captains emphasized the primary infrastructure targets. The secondary civilian parameters were not fully communicated to all commanders. Thomas said nothing. He waited. She said, "I'm not telling you this to reduce culpability. I am telling you because one of your colony worlds had a population center inside the secondary target radius, and because the captain of the 7th vessel did not know what she was firing on, and because some of my captains did know and fired anyway. I want you to have the distinction." Thomas held very still. He said, "Why are you telling me this?" She said, "You told me about the Second Fleet. Information you had no obligation to share. I am returning the honesty." She looked directly at the camera. "It is the least I can do with what we have done today." He reached into his breast pocket. He took out the letter. He did not unfold it. He held it. He said, "High Commander, this changes what I do next." She said, "I know." He said, "I will need the distinction in writing, the names of the commanders who knew, the targeting authorizations, the ones that were and were not communicated." She said, "Yes." He said, "This will go before the Coalition Council and the Galactic Oversight Body." She said, "Yes." She did not hesitate. "It should." He looked at the letter in his hand. He said, "What I am about to say, I want you to understand is not a threat. It is an observation." He paused. 22 years ago, a committee told me that building this ship was impossible. I went away and built it anyway because I believed the conversation it would eventually make possible was worth the 22 years. I was hoping I would never have to have the conversation. I was hoping the ship existing would be enough. She said, "And?" He said, "It was not enough. Today happened. 1,400 people." He looked at the letter. "The ship was necessary. It was not sufficient." She said, "What would be sufficient?" He said, "That is the conversation I would like to have. Not today. Today I need you to withdraw your fleets, and I need the documentation you described, and I need the colony worlds to stop burning." He paused. "After that, sufficient is a longer conversation." She said, "I will withdraw." He said, "Thank you." She said, "Admiral Bikel, before I go." He said, "Yes." She said, "We classified humanity as a non-military threat. 8 years of assessment, all of it technically accurate. Our largest surveyed vessel class correct. Our documented inventory correct. Our tactical doctrine analysis correct." She paused. "We were not asking the right question." He said, "What question were you asking?" She said, "What do they have? We should have been asking what are they building." He said, "Yes." She said, "There is a difference." He said, "A large one." She closed the channel. Pran was at his station when Vress gave the withdrawal order. He watched the 3 Sorvan fleets begin their organized retreat, professional, clean, the way a good fleet withdrew, no panic, no collapse, just the deliberate turning of large ships on large vectors back toward home. He opened his personal file. He found the entry from his 4th report, the section he had written and then deleted before filing because he could not make it credible. He rewrote it now. He wrote what he had believed then and what he had seen today and what the difference was between the two. He wrote, "I was right about the ship. I was wrong about why they built it." He thought about that for a while. The ship was 4.2 kilometers, 112 weapon systems, the most powerful single vessel he had ever seen sensor data on. It could have ended the operation in minutes. It could have destroyed the 3 Sorvan fleets before they made it to the outer system boundary. It had done none of those things. It had opened a channel. He wrote, "The ship was built to make a conversation possible, not to win a fight. The difference between those two purposes produces entirely different ships. We have been building ships to fight with. They built a ship to speak from." He filed the note. He would write the full report when they were home. This one would be different from the others. This one would not be sent to summaries. The Sorvan fleets were gone from the display when Thomas finally stood up. Nadia said, "Sir, sensor range clear, all 3 fleets." He said, "Good, plot course for the first colony world." She said, "We're going down." He said, "We came to help. The fighting part is finished. The helping part is not." She began plotting, then she stopped. She turned in her chair. She said, "Sir, the pocket." He looked at her. She said, "You touched it 41 times during that engagement. I know because I counted. I count things when I'm managing myself." She paused. "You went in the first time about 20 minutes in, and you took something out near the end, but I couldn't see what it was." He looked at the letter in his hand. He unfolded it. He read it one more time, 3 paragraphs, the work of a committee 22 years ago, people who had not been wrong about the numbers, people who had voted correctly given what they knew. The last line said, "The resources required for a project of this scale do not exist within current coalition authorization. The committee thanks Admiral Bickel for his proposal and wishes him well in his future endeavors." The paper was worn soft at the folds. He had folded and unfolded it many times over 22 years, had touched it without opening it more times than he could count, had carried it through 11 different postings and 3 separate rating reviews and 2 wars, and the construction of a ship that the committee would not have believed possible. He folded it one final time. He opened the small disposal panel on the arm of his command chair. He put the letter inside. He closed the panel. He did not make a speech. He did not explain what he had done. He simply put the thing he had carried for 22 years in the place where things went when they had finished being carried. Nadia was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Was it worth it, 22 years?" He looked at the colony worlds on his display. The fires were smaller now. Emergency response teams on the surface. The work of the aftermath beginning, which was always the hardest work and always necessary. He said, 198,600 people are alive on those 3 worlds right now. 1,400 are not. She said, "That's not an answer." He said, "It is the only answer there is. It was worth it and it was not enough. Both of those are true at the same time." She thought about that. She said, "Sir, is there actually another one, another ship?" He was quiet. She said, "You told Vress you would decline to answer." He said, "Yes." She said, "You declined her. I am asking you." He looked at her. 27 years old, scar on her left hand, incapable of sustained silence under pressure, counting things constantly, seeing everything. The officer who had noticed him touching his pocket 41 times and told him about the Second Fleet in time to stop something that could not be undone. He said, "There is a dry dock, in a location nobody has thought to examine. It has been operational for 11 years. She stared at him. He said, "I was not the only one who believed the conversation was worth building toward." She said, "How many ships?" He said, "That is a question I am going to decline to answer." She turned back to her console. She was smiling, not a large smile, the small one of someone who has understood something and is deciding how to hold it. The unspoken promise turned toward the first colony world, large and certain and unhurried. The way very large things moved, not with urgency, but with the quality of something that had decided its direction a long time ago, and was only now arriving at it. Below, on the colony surface, someone would pick up the mass reading in the next few minutes. A number that didn't fit any ship class. A vessel that should not exist according to any record in any database accessible to any species in this part of the galaxy. They would think it was an instrument error. They would verify it. And then they would understand that something had been watching over them that they had not known was there. Thomas thought, that is fine. He thought that was always the point. He put his hand to his breast pocket. His fingers found nothing. The fabric, the emptiness where the letter had been for 22 years. He left his hand there for a moment, feeling the absence. Then he took it out. He looked at the planet coming closer through the viewport. The fire's out now, the emergency lights on the surface visible even from here, the small distant evidence of people doing the hard, patient work of continuing when continuing was difficult. He thought about the dry dock, 11 years of operation, the second ship taking shape in the dark of a location nobody had examined. He thought 11 more years. He thought start the work. He thought about what the committee had written 22 years ago. He thought the resources do not exist. He thought find them. He looked at the planet. He thought the work does not end. He thought it was never supposed to.